Good evening and a warm welcome to the Rushcliffe Borough Council's Growth and Development Scrutiny Group meeting. I'd like to remind everyone that the meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel. In addition, other people may film, record, post on social media or blog from the meeting. The use of any such images or sound recordings is not under the Council's control. May I remind councillors to please switch your microphones off when you are not speaking. Can I also make sure that everyone has their phones on silent? I'd like to introduce, there are some new faces here and I would like to introduce those. We've got Donna Dwyer, who's the Strategic Housing Manager, Cara Pendergast, our new lead officer, Sebastian Saw from Democratic Services. I now have a new vice chairman, that's Jason Billing, and Phil Marshall here is principal planning officer. If we can now move to the agenda, and we have apologies for absence.
So we have apologies from Councillor Bird and we have Councillor Phillips here as the substitute. We also have apologies from Councillor Brown and we have Councillor Butler here to substitute.
Thank you. Do we have any declarations of interest? No? Well, in that event, we'll move to the minutes of the meeting that were held on the 28th of January. Unless anybody has anything they wish me to refer to, I'm not going to go through it page by page. Has anybody any issues with the minutes? So you're all happy that I sign those, right? Could you pass that to Sam? Okay, it's lovely. Now we move to item number 4, which is our main scrutiny item tonight, shared ownership and other affordable housing. It's quite a substantial item, so I shall watch the clock because I would like us to be away no later than 8:30. So can we, in asking any questions, make sure that we're not repeating something that's been asked or we're straying off the subject. In scrutinising this item, we're obviously looking for the best results for our residents, and that's what it's all about. And we want to make sure if there are other ways of improving. I have to say, this is a really comprehensive and well-crafted scrutiny request. And before voting, I intend to address the individual items to ensure we've actually fulfilled the requests as they are bullet pointed in the request on the request page. So without further ado, thank you, Donna, if you would like to take us through it.
Thank you and good evening. So today I'm just doing a brief verbal introduction of the report and then I'll open it up for questions. So as the chair has said, the item before you is shared ownership and other types of affordable housing. So tonight I'll be giving you a brief walkthrough of what it covers and the key takeaways before inviting questions. So the report provides an overview of the affordable housing products that are delivered in Rushcliffe, what they are, who provides them, how they're secured, and together with the updated policy and evidence base. So the evidence base largely is the 2024 Housing Needs Assessment, and that identifies a total annual need of 507 affordable homes in the borough per year, with 477 of those to be delivered as rented units and 30 for affordable home ownership. So you can see straight away that affordable home ownership is just a modest supply there compared to the rented. Delivery has grown overall, rising from 106 completions in 2021 to 293 in 24-25, but there are some in-year variances, so it very much depends on sites coming forward and what we negotiate on individual sites. Shared ownership has expanded strongly, but rented homes, which is social rented and affordable rented, remain the backbone of local supply, and they're best aligned to evidence need. And the report, and I think in the annex at the back, takes you through the different types of affordable housing, what they are. So first homes, another affordable housing product. That delivery remains minimal, only 2 units in 24-25, and until recently no discounted market sale or rent to buy completions were recorded during the past 5 years. However, to progress a stalled Section 106 site, you'll probably be aware there was a national problem for nearly 18 months about bringing forward Section 106 sites because of registered providers' limited capacity and market conditions. There are a number of stalled sites. So having affordable housing products that help cross-subsidise, make it a little bit affordable to deliver the rented units. We've utilised discounted market sale on one particular site to progress a stalled site. So we've recently secured a further 35 discounted market housing. Viability is always key when you're looking at sites. Infrastructure, affordable housing is a big one, and usually the first to go, unfortunately, when you're negotiating on site if the site isn't viable. So where viability or registered provider availability is constrained, first homes discounted market housing may be the only deliverable option on some sites. For ownership products, the council does not control marketing, allocation, service charges or resales. All those functions sit with the developers and the registered providers. So in affordable housing products, the council's principal role is through planning, Section 106 negotiations, policy compliance and monitoring. In Policy 8 of the local plan and the Affordable Housing SPD, supported by the evidence base, the 2024 Housing Needs Assessment, that's what guides the tenure mix on the sites that we seek, with rented homes prioritised wherever possible. So Section 106 negotiations remain focused on securing on-site tenure blind delivery, supported by early engagement where we can with registered providers and developers. Where there's a viability issue, that's open book viability. We get independent land valuers in to look at that. And that's to ensure that we're getting as much affordable housing as we possibly can without stifling development, the site not coming forward because the pressures are too high. And we also try to cap affordable rent products at local housing allowance, and affordable rent's another a rented product that's 80% market rents, but if you're on universal credit or a benefit, you'll only be paid up to local housing allowance, and unfortunately there's usually a gap between local housing allowance and the 80% market rent, so we have to be very careful that even on some of the rented products that come through, that they still remain affordable where we can. So we do try to negotiate that they're capped at the local housing allowance rates. So for residents, rented homes continue to provide the greatest security and affordability. There is, of course, a role for shared ownership. That offers a step onto the ladder, but that can present challenges where service charges are high. First homes and discount market sale, they help a smaller proportion of households and have limited local uptake, and that's probably because of the smaller amount of units coming through. So in closing, in terms of the summary, the report highlights both progress and challenges, strong delivery in recent years, but persistent affordability pressures. And we've always found that in Rushcliffe, the high land values, the prices of private rented sector, affordable rent. So quite often there's a huge demand for social rented units, but we have to also be aware that whilst rented units are a priority, we have to balance that with meeting the needs of everybody in the borough. So there is a market there to meet the needs of some people who want to get a first step on the ladder, and that's where affordable home ownership products come in. And that's the brief overview. Phil and I are happy to take questions on any issues that any members may have. Thank you.
Just as a starter, I may have been comparing apples with pears, but so I just want clarification. Comparing table 3 and table 4. I think that's what table 4. So one is, as I understand it, talking about need, and then that's 8.3, and then 8.4 is actually talking about delivery. That's the bit I'm interested in. We want to try and meet the need as much as possible.
That's correct. Table 3, which is based on the Housing Needs Assessment 2024, that's really important in negotiations with the developers, because that's what they'll look at. Where's the evidence base? But of course, table 4 is the delivery. That's what we've been able to negotiate. Right.
But are we trying to meet the need for social and affordable rent? Because this implies that virtually all the housing that we get involved with should be to build 477 per annum of social and affordable rent, and only 30 affordable home ownership. And really the opposite seems to happen when it comes to delivery. We're actually delivering very little on the social need. A small percentage.
It's a good question, and there are lots of variables that go into
I
what.
Can see all that.
To what's
you put it through the sausage machine, and you end up actually not getting anywhere.
Well,
not getting very far on meeting that need. Yeah.
So you're absolutely right. We don't have enough new supply to meet the need, the evidence base. So we've always got a challenge ahead of us. The policy position clearly sets out what we can negotiate on a particular site. So you'll see in the report on 8.4, it there shows what percentages of affordable housing we can request on, depending where the site is, and then what we negotiate on that site. So a site of 100 units will be 25% affordable home ownership, and the remainder rented. And there may be a number of reasons why we depart from that, but that's our starting point, and that might be site constraints, it might be viability, it might be lack of registered providers. When we had the stalled site issue, we had 8 stalled sites, and I don't think we were very different to a lot of other authorities in similar positions. There were literally no registered providers bidding. So we really had to think creative about how we get registered providers on board, and that in some instances we were talking about losing all the rented units to have affordable home ownership units, because they subsidise the site. So obviously if the developer is having to provide more rented units, it's more costly. So if a site's not viable, and there's quite a lengthy process we go through in terms of assessing viability, it might be that we look at reducing the numbers on site to make it viable, or that we look at a change in tenures that alters the viability appraisal. And in some instances, which for me is always worst case scenario, and the last resort, we take a commuted sum. And I don't like doing that, because we've always found it a challenge to spend the commuted sums that we actually have, because of land availability. So I hope that's answered your question.
Yeah, I mean,
sorry if it's a long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, I think I understand the viability argument,
Yes.
and that clearly makes a big difference. But that's a kind of negotiating stance, and you do say in paragraph 8.2 that the evidence of the needs-based thing, it underpins negotiation on planning applications and so on. So it underpins it, but actually it doesn't get you the right answer at the end. But in some ways, as an authority, we do tie our hands behind our backs, don't we? In that we have resisted any attempt to build our own social housing. That's a no-no policy-wise.
My understanding is that yes, there have been reports previously that have gone to cabinet on whether we wanted to build ourselves, and a decision was taken that we didn't. And I think in those reports it was outlined for the reasons why, and I probably also, because we're a stock transfer authority, we don't have a HRA. Of course, the legislation's now changed, and you can, without an HRA, deliver up to 1,000 units. But what I would say on that is that we did have an independent company come in a couple of years ago who specialised in affordable housing delivery, and that was really to give us an independent view on what options we were looking at, and included in that was council-led house building. And when they looked at all the options, they did agree with our position. And I think it's also we've got a very, very small team as well, with it being stock transfer authority. And if you start thinking about council-led building, it requires quite a lot of resourcing. So I'm not saying that was the only driver, but I think that is also something you have to consider. But you are right, a political decision has been made not to progress that. So we do rely on registered providers in the borough, and there are 34 registered providers with stock in the borough. Not all of those are developing registered providers. I'd probably say half of them are, but we are getting new registered providers, profit and non-for-profit, coming into the borough. Yes, so I think in terms of registered providers working in the borough, I think we do quite well when speaking to counterparts elsewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Chubb.
Sorry.
Thank you. So I've got a question about 8.4 as well. So that's leading on from that. So yeah, I understand what you're saying about viability, and what we ask for we don't always get. But I couldn't understand how from table 3, so the 30 out of 507 affordable home ownership, which is about 6%, but then what we're asking for, so of the 30% we ask for, we're then asking for 25% affordable home ownership. So why the difference in those two?
Phil might put me right on this, but I think it's also about timing. You can't look at this and then, so if this is sort of said, has this got a year thing on? No, it's not. So it's about percentages. So it depends also when the sites are coming forward as well. So we can negotiate on sites. It will be the policy position that we're negotiating on, that then depending on when a site can come forward, it can take quite some time for that to come forward. So what we're actually delivering, and if you're equating percentages, it's not always going to come out in that year to the policy position, because it might be that a site's come forward where we've had to change the tenure, get a lower mix, and where we have been able to negotiate the policy position, that site might come through in phases, or it might come through at a later time. So our delivery and the percentage makeup, as I mentioned just a moment ago, there are a number of variables that go into that, and it might be also because on a site where there were viability issues, I mean, on some big sites, we went down to 10 or 5% many years ago. And with Homes England, we've been able to increase some of the percentages on that. So where the sites are negotiated less, that's going to impact on what we've got coming through on this table. Sorry if that seems a bit of a vague answer, but there's never a strict correlation with us delivering 30% each year. Phil, have you got any further?
But it's not just the 30%, it's the makeup of that 30%, because I think the scrutiny item we're looking at shows concern about the shared ownership model. And we're massively over providing those within our 30% of affordable housing. So in table 4, 24-25, 124 of the 293. So that's 42%. So our needs is we want 6% shared ownership. We actually provided 42%. That's not just a little bit different. That's massive. Is there a reason?
There's no reason beyond the variables that I've just said. What I'd have to do is go back and look at what sites delivered that, and then look at in a little bit more detail. But what I can reassure members is, and we have a reputation of being tough for negotiating, is where the policy position states that amount, we request that, and they have to provide the evidence to depart from that. So that is always our starting position. And if they do provide the evidence, if there's a viability issue, or through the stalled sites, for example, we've lost the rented units and we've had to change them to the affordable home ownership, which is what happened on a couple of the sites, then yes, that might be why we're producing more shared ownership. But I can, if members feel that they require a bit more reassurance about that, we can provide a breakdown of the 24-25 figure as to why. I mean, we did have 116 affordable rent and social rent. That would have been 160. I can see that the shared ownership is a little bit higher there, but we could sort of look at that a little bit more and provide an explanation. I'm sure that the explanation will probably confirm what I'm saying, but I can't actually say categorically why that is right now.
Can I add a bit of an explanation?
I think that would be helpful if that could be provided, because it does seem to me a large variance which really needs answering. Sorry, Mr. Marshall.
Thank you. Just want to explain something. Our adopted local plan, or our adopted core strategy, was adopted in 2014, and that used some really old evidence at the time to set the policy position in terms of tenure split as a starting point. So that forms part of the development plan. That policy explains that the 2012 strategic housing market assessment, which was the evidence at the time, states that the total proportion of affordable housing sought, 42% should be intermediate, 39% should be affordable rent, and 19% should be social rent. So that 42% is spot on based on the adopted policy. We've had the updated evidence from 2024, and that evidence is being used to underpin the Greater Nottingham strategic plan, so that position may change. So that evidence is really up to date. The majority of our sites was granted pre that evidence, so it would use that original policy position as a starting point.
So the table 3, that's what you're using now, but what the table 4 is based on.
It's a legacy historical position on previous policy position. Yeah. Thank you, that helps. But do you with
I think we've had an answer there. I don't see how you can compare 2 different scenarios. We need a comparison each year, not one year against another, because otherwise you're going to be, at one point you're going to be asking for one figure, and another point you're going to be showing another figure. So the 2 things don't add up. You've got to do it both the same way.
May I? If I may, Chair, would it be helpful? I think it'd be helpful if you could, because I understand what you're saying. Some housing developments are commissioned, granted consent under one framework, yes, and then it comes in. Can you provide a sort of almost a definitive at what point you stop using the previous framework and then a new one comes through, and when will we see those figures feeding through into the actual provisions? So I think it'd be helpful to then sort of drill, for us to understand the information. So I do appreciate that you're trying to juggle two completely different sort of frameworks and the provision. And as a supplementary, am I right in understanding, because it looks really good that we've got this sudden uplift in affordable rented and shared ownership, etc. Is that because of what you said before? Things come through in phases and that comes through at the end, and it looks like all of a sudden we're doing really, really well, but there's basically late delivery of previous started development.
The significant uplift we've seen in recent years is because of the hard work of the council getting a local plan adopted with a lot of sites in that plan. They're starting to come through in significant numbers, you may have noticed, across the borough. They may start to tail off as we run out of sites, because vast majority of our local plan sites got permission pre-2024. So it may be that going forward, we'll start supply from Clifton and supply from East Gamston going forward in phases. East Gamston hasn't got permission yet, so that's one we're in the process of negotiating, isn't it? But 3,000 homes at Clifton were all granted under the previous the older policy and not the emerging policy that evidence base that Donna explained.
Yeah. So I think it would be nice to have a note that sort of says, in year whatever we got this amount, but that basically because they were started back then, so we can see what the lag is. And as Phil said, because sites are being built out, there's going to be a dwindling of provision. So kind of a note to say, an advisory note to say this will decline because this estate is pretty much finished and this was delivered. We can only, and do you have a sort of forecasted delivery of the sites that are under development according to what the developers are going with at the moment? I realise the caveat there. Can you provide a note that sort of says we can expect in the next 2 years, 3 years, or this year, this number?
I can answer the projections. So the affordable housing projections for 26-27 this year that we're in, at period 3 we'd got 162, and our target for this year was 160. For next year, for 27-28, our target is 170. So when we say target, that how we get our projections is that the planning policy officers, they actually look at the permissions and the sites coming through, and then they look at the phasing of those, and there's a little bit of a finger in the air there, but that's how we try to get our projections. So just because we've got 300 one year, it doesn't mean to say that that's going to be the same the following year, but that there are projections where we are this year so far and for next year.
Could you use your microphone, please?
Yeah, just to add that there's 2 years of COVID where nothing was being built, so the uplift looks like it's massive, and it's just a catch up.
Correct, and I think the point Phil made about the previous policy position where we were negotiating 42% share the affordable intermediate products is why that's so high there. Yet on all the new negotiations, we've got the new evidence base, and that's obviously uplifted the rented units that we now negotiated.
Councillor Walker, I think you.
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry to catch you.
Not at all. I'm on a sort of similar line, and with my hand holding, clearly something I think I misunderstood here. I think one of the interesting things from my perspective is I think I kind of got a bit lost, Phil, in terms of the changing the policy position. But as I understand the policy position at the moment, the aim is to provide 75% of the affordable properties as rental products and 25% as ownership products. Okay, and what table 4 tells us is the long-term trend every year is that the rental product proportion of the total is quite a lot under 75% and reducing.
No, I can see why you said that, but that will be partly because of Phil's comment about maybe some of the declining sites because the permissions coming through. So because we've now got a change in the policy framework, and we're now at a higher negotiating percentage for the rented units, that should mean that the longer term projection is, when you look at the percentages, is that we negotiate more rented units, subject to them being deliverable, let's say. But Phil, did you want to go on to your point that maybe we'll exhaust the permissions at some point? Was that the point you were making about declining numbers in the future?
Yeah, it's likely that all of our smaller large sites in our local plan, if that makes sense, will be built out in the next 5 to 6 years, and will be solely reliant on the Clifton and the Gamston site as sites identified by the council for the delivery of affordable housing, unless we review the local plan.
Still quite a significant number of houses there. So sorry, it's still quite a considerable amount.
Potentially, yes,
yeah.
But the decision on Gamston has not been made, and it's still under negotiation. But the Clifton site, it's only at 10% affordable housing on that because of the massive infrastructure costs.
Yeah.
So it's not going to be a massive amount. Although something else that might skew these figures, we have had 2 or 3 sites and a phase at Clifton that has been predominantly affordable housing products, shared ownership and rent. So in those positions, if a site's 100% affordable housing, you're going to be a bit more flexible on the split.
Yeah.
Has that proportion, i.e. 75% of the affordable properties provided are rental products, for how long has that been the policy position, roughly?
So the housing needs assessment was 2024, and we started negotiating this in 2024. So we were on it straight away because we knew it was beneficial for the authority to get more rented units. So we did implement it during 2024. the housing needs assessment took a couple of years to do, so we knew that was coming through.
Okay, so maybe the penny's dropping. So like, can we remember what so it's 75% now?
Yes.
What was it before?
So that was the figure that Phil gave before. It was, we negotiated 42% on shared. Sorry, you go first.
So in our adopted core strategy from 2014, our position was 42% should be intermediate, 39% should be affordable rent, and 19% should be social rent. So it was 58% in total.
Right, which you've been hitting.
Which we've been hitting.
Sorry.
Slow, but I got there in the end. I mean, we've got the updated evidence that Donna is using now to try and up the amount of rent on sites, but there's always this risk that a developer will point to our adopted plan and say, well, that's a split we want, if that makes sense.
Okay. I think that's probably answered the question. I could see a smile over there. Councillor Ellis.
Thank you, Chair. There seems to me to be a bit of a mismatch between the housing needs assessment and the reality in Rushcliffe. And I'm not sure that we should be getting over concerned about that, because we're hitting the overall target for housing people, albeit it's not in line with the policy that we would like to see provided. Have I made myself clear?
Do you mean the overall housing target as in the growth target as opposed to affordable housing target?
What I'm trying to say is that we're not meeting the housing needs assessment target, but we are getting the right total number, the right total, wrong percentage.
Right.
And does that matter?
So yes, there is a mismatch. You'll probably find that in many authorities,
I'm sure.
and as you go further north, probably. But yes, we won't be able to meet the 507, but we'll do our level best to get as much as we can within the policy position that has been approved as in the local plan. And yes, that always does create a challenge. We have lots of people on the waiting list for many, many years because of the housing coming through. That we've got relets, but we've only got about 250 relets of existing accommodation. So by far, our housing supply is new build. We rely on Section 106 development. Is that answered the question? So we do. You're right in that we won't meet the housing need assessment, but what we are meeting is our policy position on negotiating, unless the developer can evidence a viability issue. So that I think there'll always be that mismatch, unless we get a big windfall of housing to read.
Yes, talking of the viability, then how does it? Who decides on the on whether it is viable as time goes on? Is it just the developer comes along to us and says, "Sorry, we can't do this now," and then do we just? I presume we go back to them and enter into hopefully a fairly robust discussion and negotiation, and also without naming names, because that wouldn't be fair or appropriate. Are we finding some developers are better than others, perhaps, at being cooperative with the targets and the whole the commitments, despite the fact that the 106s and all the rest of it in place? Do we have any particular challenges with certain developers? I'm not expecting you to name places or names.
Sorry. So the first question about viability, yes, we have a robust process, and I hear from lots of developers, oh, it's not viable, we can't deliver, and I sort of take that with a pinch of salt to start off with. That's not to say that it's not viable. but our SPD is quite strong. There's a whole chapter on viability. So we adopt a residual land value process, and that's where if the developer claims the site's not viable, then we adopt an open book process, and we get an independent land valuer in, and the land valuer then goes through all the development costs, and using the residual land value methodology, it ensures that the price of the land wasn't too high, because the developer should always take account of the local authority's policy position before they purchase any land or take an option out on it to ensure that they can meet it. So it shouldn't be an argument that the land costs this and therefore we can't deliver your policy position. So yes, there's a real robust process that we go through, and it takes quite some time. And when that independent valuation assessment comes in, they are the experts, so we will abide by that. And if that states that the site will only deliver from 30 to 5%, we have to do the 5%. But there are other things that we can do. So we could, as an alternative, look at changing the tenure. So as I've said, rented units are more costly. So it might be to keep the 30%, we reduce the rented units and have more affordable home ownership, which balances out the site. So I hope that reassures you that there's a process there. Now, in terms of developers, no, I wouldn't say. I mean, I attend a number of meetings, and more recently I've been attending across a national cross-working party with developers, registered providers and local authorities to look at how we can increase delivery on Section 106. And developers always do say that they want to deliver on site, but there's not always the registered providers that are there to bid on the sites, or there might be other variables. So registered providers, obviously there's a lot of regulatory requirements at the moment on registered providers, and so they might pull back on their development programs. When they're looking at management on some of the sites, they might not be interested in the smaller units because they might be a little bit more difficult to manage than the family housing, and we ask for a mix. So registered providers, it's entirely up to them whether they bid on the site. They don't have to. And so throughout the stalled Section 106 site process, the issue we raised with central government was very much about the capacity of registered providers. And we were asking whether Homes England had, because a lot of the registered providers work with Homes England, they get their grant from Homes England. So we were asking Homes England whether they had more levers to be able to encourage the registered providers to bid on stalled sites, maybe less favourable sites. And at the last meeting, I was at this cross-section working party meeting last week, all representatives, and National Housing Federation was there as well, agreed that there were still some structural problems in the system. So it's not perfect, and I think that's when you have to take a balanced view of clearly our starting point is to meet need, but if you've not got registered providers bidding on the site, you can't have no development coming forward. So I hope that answers your question.
And do you find that the various registered providers, do they tend to stick with certain developers only, or do they flit around between? I mean, yeah, you're nodding as if you know. You can see what I'm thinking there.
Yes, there'll be some developers that have got good relations with registered providers and their preferred partners that deliver, because it's always about risk with development. So if the developers work with a registered provider and they've delivered, then yes, they'll be a preferred partner. But it very much comes back to the contract that's been signed with, if they're a strategic investment partner, where they get quite a lot of grant about what units they've got to deliver. So there'll be some pressure on registered providers to meet their contractual requirements with Homes England, and within that there'll be an element of Section 106 sites as well as other land-led sites to meet their contractual target. But the registered providers are looking over a wide geographical area, so it's not just Rushcliffe. So they might be looking at which sites they feel more confident will deliver, and of course the bottom line in terms of finances, which ones help in terms of investment, long-term returns as well. So so yes, there will be some partnering, but where we had the stored site issue, we took a really robust, firm position. If there was a developer that came and said, oh, I've gone out to all the registered providers and I can't find anyone, we then provided a list of every registered provider in the borough, and we requested written evidence that that registered provider was not bidding and the reasons they weren't, which enabled us to look at that to see whether we could use any of our own grant to plug the gap there. And then we asked them, as part of the stored site process, the government, it was Homes England actually, they introduced a new website, a clearinghouse website, which required all developers to put all stored sites on the website so that everybody could look at that. I don't think that has achieved the results that everybody expected, and there's only been a small handful of sites. So I do think that there are structural issues in the system, and depending on what side of the table you sit in a developer's forum, I think most will agree with that. So we have to work with the best with what we've got, but central government are trying to streamline that process, and one of the outcomes from the cross-party working group that I'm on is to draft national Section 106 guidance to make it a little bit clearer. So I think, you know, it's a slow process, but things are happening. Are they going to make a huge difference in Rushcliffe in the next two to 3 years? Probably not, because there's always the legacy issue with permissions, the policy position. But I hope, again, it gives you confidence that we are trying to look at all different things and look at tabling a number of options to bring forward as much affordable housing as we can to meet need, but without stifling development.
Councillor Walker, I think you've indicated it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm building up a better picture here. So I'm interested in how that negotiation process works. So I think I'm clear on open book basis, we can afford X. I'm clear on, I think, so yeah, I'm clear on that. What drives the decision-making process around, once you've got down from whatever it is, 30 to 10, 100 affordable, what drives the decisions from there? Is it on a policy, is that on a policy basis, or is it kind of, you know, experience officer led around, so say for example, we've talked about it should be needs driven and we know where the need is, and I don't know, somebody might argue that a lower overall number of rental products meets a higher need than a higher number of ownership products, but your headline figure would be lower, but we might be meeting more need in that scenario. So there's kind of, I would consider them to be policy strategic decisions underpinning what you're asking for, and I think we're not clear on where those are coming, where those are coming from, because I think I totally get all of the, well, not all of them. I think I understand a lot of the tensions that are going on there. So how are those kind of discussions being approached?
It's a good question. So the SPD is very clear, our policy position is very clear that rented units should be prioritised, and that's obviously going back to what you said about the evidence base. So if we're in a negotiation process where that policy position can't be delivered, then it comes down to office at work. Obviously we look at the framework. So for me, and I would always be involved where there's a viability issue, and I don't just manage affordable housing, I manage the housing options team, the waiting list, so I know what the pressures are on the housing register. And what I would say first of all is that nobody on the housing register can afford the intermediate products, the affordable home ownership products. So we've got about 600 people on the housing register, and they are just looking for rented units. And of course, we've got the homelessness pressures, people in temporary accommodation. So if I'm negotiating on the site and the developer as we can't get what we need policy position, my starting point is always rented units. I do not want to lose the rented units. I would rather sacrifice the affordable home ownership units. But there are a number of things I need to consider there. So it would be, again, about balanced communities. It's about what's that site look like? Where's the affordable housing? Are we still able to pepper pot that? Because obviously we want balanced sites. We don't want sites that are bringing forward all rented. Even that wouldn't help meet our need, even if we did have that. So we have got the policy framework that influences how we negotiate, and my starting point would always be rented units. So that's where I would, if I was going to sacrifice anything, it would start with the affordable home ownership units, and I'd work backwards from there, and that's to help meet the need of people on the housing register.
Can I just say something there? So if your starting point is always rental units because those on the housing register can't afford the affordable unit product, then we aren't actually meeting that need, are we? We're putting those people into rented, not into affordable homes. So does that not mean that the price of the affordable homes is not what it says on the tin? They're not affordable.
We're having, as an authority, we have statutory duty to meet housing need, and that duty is not just to meet the need for those that require rented units, it's also to meet the need of people who can afford intermediate products. So when we've got our policy position, and within that policy position, developers can, the NPPF, the National Planning Framework, a developer can come along and say, I want to deliver discounted market housing as opposed to shared ownership, and we'd have to consider that. But on the rented units, it would be social rent or affordable rent. So it is a difficult one. So we are still, our policy position is 75% rented and 30% affordable home ownership. So we are looking to meet the needs of a wide variety of our population, different earnings. But if a site isn't viable and something has to give, we have to look at the pressures on the local authority, and that will be the waiting list, that will be the temporary accommodation, it'll be the disruption to families and children in temporary accommodation, it will be the cost to the authority. So of course, if I've got a reduced amount of affordable housing on a site, I'm mindful of that position. So my priority as set out in the SPD is always to try and negotiate rented where I can't achieve the policy position number. And I know that on other sites coming forward, I'm generally going to get where there's not a viability issue. I know that developers won't have a problem in providing affordable home ownership. So I know that that supply will continue to come through. The most difficult supply to get is the rented units. Does that answer your question?
Yes, let me think about that.
Just wondering if you could explain that very last point that you were stating.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what the last point was, but I suppose it's getting to the bottom line of the viability.
Is it about the rented units?
Yes.
Yes. So if a site, yes. So if it was a site of 100 units, normally, so that'd be 30 units.
Yeah.
What are the maths in terms of 75% and 25? Yeah, 75 and 25. So if it went down to 10%, something has to give. So I wouldn't straight away go to the 75-25 split on a reduced number. I'd say instead of 30%, I've now got 10%. And again, it depends on viability. And what I might say then to the developer is, okay, you've not been able to give me the 30%, but the remaining 10% I want to be rented. And that's because of the pressures we have on the housing register and the temporary accommodation.
But it's the viability argument is used by the developer to build affordable rather than rented.
So the viability argument, there will be a number of, so the bottom line, if it's not viable, developers won't come to us and say, and it's not viable, therefore I want to give you X, Y, and Z. That would be a decision that, as part of the negotiation process, I will say, well, my priority is I would like this, this, and this. And if the developer still comes back and states, which he shouldn't if it's gone through a formal viability process, and the viability process has said, actually, this site can deliver 10%, really we're in the driving seat at that point. We can sort of say what we want, but as part of that negotiation process, you can look at different tenures. So if there is an issue with viability, it might be that I don't request all rented, and I still might, on that 10, I still might go half and half, because affordable housing products cross-subsidise rented. They cost more. So it depends on how far we're out on the viability issue. So it depends on the site and the process that we go through and the numbers we're looking at. And I suppose officers' professional view, usually myself and colleagues, that will look at where that best meets the need of the authority. But when we're making those decisions as officers, we're making those within the agreed and approved policy framework.
Can I just ask one?
You may.
In terms of getting a better understanding of the needs assessment, is there a document to go to? One that's quoted there as a Greater Nottingham.
Yes.
Actual one. Would that be the best place to start, or would it be the SPD, the affordable housing?
So I think both of the documents are useful. I can send out the housing needs assessment's a huge document, but I can send out a summary to members if that's helpful.
Okay, and the other bit linked to all that is the role of the waiting list and how much that really is a really important factor in terms of the ultimate need when it comes, and how much that's been fluctuating over the years, and whether it's, you can look ahead and say that it's looking like it's going to get worse, or is that purely economic situation?
The market will have a bearing on that, but what I can say to you is that for years and years it's hovered around 600.
Yeah, okay.
Can I just clarify something? The developers would prefer to build the affordable rather than the rented. But we haven't got people who can afford the affordable. But we've got lots of people who want the rented. So are you telling me that we're building affordable homes that are standing empty?
No.
Oh.
So the waiting list will only have people who are eligible to go on the register. So people who can afford to purchase properties or affordable housing products, purchase a share of a property. I hate to make sweeping statements, but if we just generalise, they probably wouldn't be eligible to come onto the housing register. So those people on the housing register, we know, are people who can't afford to purchase properties themselves. So so that's the housing register, and that's why our priority is for rented units. When we look at the need there, and the housing needs market assessment states that as well. But there's also, as an authority, we also have a duty to meet that wider need. Now, we won't have nomination rights to those properties, but as part of the evidence base, it states a percentage of our population would want affordable home ownership products, like a percentage might want later living. So we have to be looking wider than rented. So we have to look at the needs, the borough-wide needs. And so that's why our policy position states that 75% of any site will be for rented to meet the need on the housing register. But of course, even though we have minimal influence over that outside the affordable delivery process, within the borough, there'll be a number of residents who will want affordable home ownership products. And so when those are delivered, that will be to meet the needs of those people that day to day we wouldn't see. They wouldn't come to the housing option service. They wouldn't be applying to go on the housing register. But as an authority, we've got a statutory duty to meet those wider needs. And that's why we negotiate rented as well as affordable housing home ownership products. I always say when I'm in negotiation with developers that affordable home ownership products are a necessary evil because they take away from the rented, but they do meet a need elsewhere. I hope that explains it a little bit.
Thank you. Oh, Councillor Mason.
Thank you. Just asking about first time buyers, you know, because there's the first home ownership at a discount. How do we promote that, and how does that work, and who do they work with to get that? Is it the same as the housing associations? It's with them. Who gives them the discount, and who says that they can have it under the first homes?
So the National Planning Policy Framework sets out what products are in the affordable home ownership products.
Oh, yes.
So that would be your first homes, your discount market housing.
But do they come to us, or do they go to the developers?
Yeah. So table 5.2 in the report does tell you about the management there, but basically what happens is, as I've said previously, we will negotiate those properties, but then the marketing, the allocations, the management is led by the registered provider or the
Okay.
developer, depending on the product.
And are they named, or a certain percentage, a number, like the other affordable renting houses? Do they set aside particular houses for first home buyers?
Yes, so the 25% affordable home ownership product, so we've got 75% rented and the 25% affordable home ownership products on each site. We will then agree with the developer what type of product that will be. So quite often we negotiate shared ownership because that is a more affordable product. It allows people to get a step on the ladder at a lower price, whereas the first homes, I think that's
It's the
30%
homes.
First homes, sorry, yeah. You need a discount. That's a discount of 30%. And when you look at the values of properties in Rushcliffe, even with a discount of 30%, it's
still expensive. They're still higher. So do we give out? How many of those are allocated, or are they never allocated because the rental section is in such need?
So we only have nomination rights and manage and control the allocations process for the rented units. All the affordable home ownership products, we don't get involved with that at all. Okay. So our role is just through the planning section 106 to agree those numbers, and then we have a role in monitoring that. But the rest of that then falls with the registered provider and the developer, and they are responsible.
There,
they do. So you'll see.
I'm a first time buyer.
Yeah, you'll see on maybe on a number of news sites, the boards, it will say about shared ownership, and then people will go to them, and if they're then sold at a later date, that's via the normal estate agents process that goes through.
Yes, yeah, I realise that. I think I was on Metropolitan when I first came on in 2002 or something.
Yes, Metropolitan have got in fact, they've got the highest number of affordable home ownership products in the borough,
didn't they? And at that time, I then transferred to the London lot, and they have problems. They know they've got problems. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. Councillor Chaplin.
Yeah. Can I just ask about accessible housing? Because there was nothing in here about numbers of accessible housing, and I had a quick look through the SPD. Couldn't find anything in there either. But I've not been just here. Do we have an allocation?
So my understanding is for accessible housing, it's now 5% on. Phil will confirm. The agreement, whatever percentage Phil confirms in a moment, the agreement that we've got is to meet that percentage. We said that we would do that on social housing rather than open market, because I think when you've got a policy position, you could meet the number of accessible houses that you're supposed to provide through open market as well. But for us, and you may know with the demands on the disabled facilities grants budget, we are very much trying to increase the supply of accessible units, and that's where we use our community sums, the council's grant. So when we're in negotiations, even if there's a site where let's say we've met the target for the accessible housing that Phil's going to tell you in a minute about, we always say to the developer, and in addition to the 30% you're giving us, we've got our own capital grant. Can we make some of those houses, and we'll pay the overcost, accessible? And it's always in our conversations, because I also manage the DFG service, so I'm aware of the pressures. Phil, can I hand over to you?
Yeah, local plan policy, and it's not high. We ask for on sites of 100 dwellings and over, at least 1% should comply with the requirement M43. M43s.
One's accessible and one's adaptable.
I think M43 is the one that costs an absolute fortune to kit out.
That'll be the equivalent of the wheelchair adapted.
Yeah.
And one's accessible, which means that it's got wide corridors, but not necessarily wheelchair adaptable.
Policy doesn't stipulate whether that should be marketed or affordable, but as you said, we try and negotiate it on the affordable units that requirement's met.
Do we have any figures on that?
I'll look back. Of course we can. When we had the DFG scrutiny, you'll remember
Yes.
Richard came along. He did provide some figures. So I think in the last DFG report that we'll report that we have figures on that.
I think
Yeah.
you're right.
Yeah.
But I think in the context of
We
this
can
scrutiny,
confirm,
it'd be good
yes.
to see those
Yes.
figures again. I think members would appreciate that. I think Councillor Phillips had you indicated.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've got a couple of questions about the shared ownership. So if it's two properties, identical properties on a development, one's 100% ownership, one's say 50%, who sets the price for the 50%? Because it's not 50% of the 100% price, is it? It tends to be higher. And do we have any influence on when that price is set?
No. So we can in section 106 we can say the shared ownership on this site should be accessible at 25% or 50%, or we can just leave it to the developer. So is that answered your question,
Yeah.
or is it how they calculate that 50%?
Yeah, because when I was looking for a property for my son and daughters, then we'd see something, think, well, that's a good price, and then we'd realise it was only 50% ownership. And if you double it up, it was a lot more than 100% ownership.
Oh, I see what you're saying. So you're saying
Who sets that price? Yes.
Sorry. Yes. I have got a sheet here on shared ownership, but I'll try to do it from memory because I can't find it. Never comes to hand. So shared ownership. So yes, it can. Here we go. So shared ownership can sometimes, for some people, appear to be less affordable than buying outright, and that's because you have to pay the mortgage on the 50% example, and then you have to pay rent on the other half, and so it depends on how the registered provider calculates that, and the CPI that they the CPI level that they put on that. So we don't control that, basically. I think the point that you make is a valid point. I think shared ownership is more about getting the foot on the ladder. So it's for people who probably wouldn't be able to afford to buy outright, and buying at that lower percentage enables them to get the foot on the ladder and then build up that equity and staircase up. And I have heard people say that it can be just as expensive, if not more sometimes, than buying outright. But I think the difference there is that they wouldn't have been able to get a mortgage or the deposit to buy outright. So
Yeah.
probably,
Okay.
hopefully that's answered that question.
It's answered that, but I've got a few more sort of questions around shared ownership again. So somebody buys a property on shared ownership and then decides they want to sort of move on, sell the property. Do they have to sell that back to the registered provider? Can they sell it on the open market?
Yes.
Do they get value for money, basically, for their property?
So we're not involved in this, but I can tell you my little bit of knowledge that I know on it. So the shared ownership do have buyback leases, and they're with the registered providers. And within those leases, the first refusal always goes back to the registered provider, so they can buy that property back. If they don't want that, then they can sell those shares on the open market through estate agents, and it'll be advertised as a shared ownership property. But that when they come to sell that, then there might be an equity increase in their property from when they first purchased it on that percentage of the share.
Okay,
Does that answer?
it does. So they've got a limited sort of market to where they can sell that their 50% to, basically.
Potentially,
Yeah.
and
And
then
they're not always going to get the best price because you're not going to have as many people looking at that property.
maybe not. And I think that comes down to each individual's own choices and their affordability and what products are available. It's probably a fair point.
Okay. And the final question then is, if somebody goes shared ownership and then eventually they buy the whole property out, and then they sell it on to whoever because they own 100%, we've lost one of those shared ownerships. Basically, our stock's reducing all the time. So
Yeah.
how does that get replenished? Can it be replenished by buying something at full price and then putting it back to shared ownership price?
So the answer to your question is there is a loss of a unit. I suppose you have to look at the drivers of that policy, and it's very much, I mean, this is national policy, so it's very much about enabling people to get on the home ownership ladder. And if somebody can staircase up and purchase that property, then that is somebody who doesn't need social rented housing or the private rented sector. And any and the shares that are, so the registered provider will also get receipts back from the sale as their shares diminish as the owner staircases up, and those receipts are usually recycled back into affordable housing. So I suppose if that helps in a way, yes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Can we guarantee that those receipts are recycled back? Because I think that's a bit dangerous.
We don't control that process. That's just my understanding of it, and that will be, this is criteria set by central government, so it's not something that we could influence. But I do think what I do know is where a unit has been grant funded by Homes England. So if that registered provider initially purchased that unit using grant funding, any of those receipts have to be recycled back into affordable housing. So I suppose I don't know how the registered providers funded those units as to whether they would then recycle that. And that goes into all the registered providers' business plan and development appraisals, something I don't know too much about and can't comment on accurately.
Possibly.
I was intrigued earlier when you said, when we're talking about discounted sale prices, the fact that when it goes on the open market later on, it can be sold at full price. Part of our matrix was to work out if there's anything that we can feed back to the government, because I'm thinking in a borough that is not predominantly, but we have a very large rural percentage of it. If a house or a property in a rural area is sold to somebody at a discounted entry, that need is probably because they're on a lower income because they're living working in a rural area, and to lose the option of somebody else being able to buy that property at the same deal, to me is an outrageous loss, to be honest. I know that years ago when we were looking to buy in Devon, we didn't move, obviously. We were restricted from even applying to bid on some houses because you had to have either a tie to the area, or it was a first home at a discount, which is why it was so attractive for us in the first place. We couldn't afford it, but we couldn't buy it because it had to be sold to somebody who needed that same thing. So if it can be done in one area, is there any lever or mechanism that can be applied here to make sure that doesn't get lost?
You may be referring to rural exception sites, and so if a development comes forward under rural exception sites and there's shared ownership, for example, they can never buy outright 100%. There's usually a cap of 80% on those, and that's to prevent exactly what you're saying in terms of that rural village and meeting that local need. So there are provisions there where it's a rural site that it can be capped not to lose that unit. And
I'm more thinking about if it's a first time buyer getting a discount.
Okay, discounted market housing.
Discount market
Yeah,
housing.
I can understand.
Is there any way of keeping that so that that has to be sold back into the scheme or through a scheme, so that somebody who buys it is also buying it at first time discount?
Yes, that's the criteria for the discounted market housing. It's on the land registry, and that discount is passed on in perpetuity. So the next person, if they sell, so if it's a discounted market housing and it's 30% less than the open market value, that's on the title deeds, and that's passed on. So when they sell that property then has to be sold at 30% less, so that that discount is always passed on in perpetuity.
So the person selling, it might go up at 250, but they only get 70% of it.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's advertised at that price, but with a discount.
So there'll be a red book valuation at the time, independently undertaken by the registered provider as to what the open market price is, and then they will take off the 30%, and then it's resold at less than that because it's in the land registry.
I'm conscious of time and of the questions that were on the scrutiny request. There are two which to me we don't seem to have covered. That was point 5, how are ward members involved in this decision at planning stage? And point 6, is any additional support available or needed for existing residents in shared ownership schemes?
So if I start backwards on point 6, we don't have any involvement or manage those units, and it's a little bit like the rented units. The registered providers are the landlord, and the same with the affordable home ownership products, and those registered providers are regulated by the regulator of social housing, and so in terms of standards, customer satisfaction, etc., that would be the responsibility of the registered provider. We wouldn't get involved in that.
So to pick up on that, so the question is there any additional support available or needed? So we as a council were not in a position to provide any additional support, even if it was needed.
So I think the honest answer to that is that we don't know that need, if that support need, because we're not involved in managing those properties. If somebody came to housing options and said, I've got a tenancy issue or homelessness, and they were a shared owner, then we would advise them in accordance with how they're presented. But in terms of performance or residents having a support need, that's not something we would be involved with because we don't manage those products.
Councillor Walker, does that?
Oh, sorry.
It's just kind of interesting, isn't it? In and of itself, but you know, we've got powers with respect to issues in private rented sector. We haven't got powers for people who own their own properties. Well, I suppose no, we have, haven't we? You know, in certain circumstances. But you know, perhaps what's behind this is, you know, people who are in between, and particularly shared ownership, where you face the difficulty of owning say 50% of the property but having 100% of the repairing obligation, and essentially you've got a landlord. So where can you go if you've got a problem with your landlord?
So it would be the complaints process. So you'd go through your normal landlord, you'd exhaust their complaints process, and then you would go to the ombudsman. So that's individual complaints. If it was a systemic issue, then the social housing regulator would get involved.
Yes, I don't work on the development management side of things. I have done in the past a number of years ago. So I might have to take this question back to the relevant team in terms of how they consult with local ward members at the planning application stage.
Can I ask a generic question, given the fact that we're talking about overall affordability for residents in whichever category they're in? In another aspect of the world of planning and housing, we hear and talk a lot about estate fees, management fees, which I know that is subject to a separate discussion and all the rest of it that is ongoing. How do they work with people in shared ownership or rented? Do they still pay those management fees, or do they pay proportional? I just generally don't know what the situation is there, because that's another expense. Obviously, the fact that they without being patronising, the fact that people are in a need for rented or shared ownership, they're perhaps financially challenged. Well, they are. Let's face it, the world of housing. So it's just the management fees. How does that all work with it? Or is it just like everyone else?
It's not something I know a lot about, and that's because we don't get that involved with it. But if it was service charges on a rented property,
well, no, I'm thinking more of because these are all on the big developments.
Oh.
And we know, and we as councillors often hear from residents who have bought the houses outright, some of whom may or may not realise they'd also signed up to pay a management fee on top of the council tax. So do those management fees still apply to anyone who's in any of these categories?
So that is outside of my area, I'm afraid. That would be planning, as part of the planning process, and the managing agent on site and what fees were being charged. And I'm not sure what leverage planning has on that, but it's something we could take away and find out for you.
And in point of fact, following on from that, what I wanted to ask was, are the registered providers treated in the same way as the managing companies of the open space management? Because we drew up a best practice guide for open space management, and I just wonder if the registered providers are included in that, because in my view they should be treated in the same way as anyone else.
That's a planning question. I'm not able to offer an answer to that. We'd have to take that away to the planning colleagues. Take that away, I'm afraid.
I can provide some comments. So currently registered providers aren't included in the good practice guide for the management of open spaces, because I suppose it's not the same question. So the management of open spaces guide is around how the open spaces are maintained and the fairness of fees, the transparency of fees, and the billing process. I don't think it's the same relationship, and I suppose it's driven by a perceived issue around the fairness of the management of open spaces and the relationship with management companies. I don't know if there is that same perceived issue with the relationship to registered providers.
Well, it occurs to me, and it was something that I was going to conclude with, that in fact we should have some form of good practice guide. I know we can't get involved in the sense that we've outsourced this to a third party, but I do think we should be, we're delivering for our residents a service, And I do think we ought to be saying, these are our expectations. This is how this service should be delivered, and draw up a good practice guide.
Are you talking about the process? Because we can't influence that because that's national policy. Are you talking about the whole affordable housing process?
No, I'm not so much talking about the way that people access the affordable housing, which, as you say, is government led. Yeah. I'm talking about how these people are on similar or on estates where people have purchased houses, etc. They're accessing local amenities, but they're also you say that the managing companies, or rather registered providers, handle all the paperwork and the service charges and whatever. I still think we should have some input over that, which says what is good practice, what you transmit to the new tenants.
In relation to open spaces and service charges, or just the open space?
In relation to their living in those properties.
So so I suppose as those tenants as customers, in that sense of they have a relationship with the registered provider, and is there a set of standards or principles as to the level of service they
That's
can
exactly
expect
what I said.
providers?
Yes, they're customers.
So the affordable housing, the affordable home owners, they, as part of their buyback lease, they will the solicitors, when they purchase those properties, they're huge buyback leases, and it will have all of that detail in there relating to service costs, open space costs, etc. As you would if you were purchasing your own property. So I suppose is it not down to the solicitors at the time who are acting on behalf of those purchasers to make sure that the purchasers are happy with what's in that buyback lease and what they're buying? Sorry if I've not understood you correctly.
I understand what you're saying, and that would be true of anybody purchasing on anywhere, Sharp Hill Woods or wherever, Compton Acres, but at the same time you are purchasing through an organisation which manages your property.
So would that be, sorry, I'm being difficult. Would that be, I'm trying to understand, would that be good practice guidance really that the registered providers should be drafting and providing? Because we don't get involved in that
but
side
we should be saying our expectation is that you adhere to this good practice guide and deliver this information to your tenant or lessee.
My initial response to that, I suppose, is the same as the rented units. We have no jurisdiction, no control to be able to do that. The registered provider is governed, their conduct, customer standards, all by the regulator of social housing. So there is a body.
There is a body
that already does all of that, and has got the occupant's interests as a tenant or provider there. I hope that answers your question.
It's all very complicated, isn't it?
Just to support that point, because I think the distinction was, and where the open spaces issue arose, was that there was a lack of regulation.
Yes, exactly.
And a lack of sort of recourse for those residents. But if there is that existing regulation.
So that answers that. Right, okay. Well, I think if I could just ask Councillor Billings and Councillor Walker, as you were the authors of this request, have we met your requests?
I would say as far as we can, yes. that sounds a bit of a caveat here, because I do appreciate having through discussions and hearing what Donna and Phil have said, that there are restrictions, there are things that you can't do. Am I happy about the reality on the ground? Probably not. I would touch on a point that Councillor Ellis asked earlier, was that, you know, is it an issue if that need is not being provided? I would say yes, because as long as there is a waiting list, there is a need. If we haven't finished addressing that need, there is always going to be an issue. It's not a fault of anybody, it's the way things are, but yes, there is always a need and there will always be an issue. Yeah, the thing about proportion of what is trying to remember, yeah, what is 30% of what percentage, and it comes down to units, and finding a suitable number of units that are rented is crucial. I do appreciate how strong, yeah, government and national regulations are what they are. So yes, I personally feel that we have scrutinised the subject tonight. There are more questions to be asked, and if you're happy, I will probably fire some gentle questions, having spoken to my colleagues.
I think I came with more questions than I've asked, but I think they've been answered along the way, because I think it's a great deal more complex than we from the outside were aware. But if those actions that you've taken them, right, if we could get a response to those, that would be wonderful. And can I now ask members if they are therefore happy with the recommendation and to vote on them? Note the available affordable housing products in Rushcliffe and their benefits and limitations for residents. And I think we've, yes. Consider the importance of ongoing collaboration with developers and registered providers to enhance affordable housing delivery. Very definitely, I think they're aware of that. And acknowledge the council's limited control over allocation, management and marketing of affordable home ownership products and support monitoring, section 106, compliance and delivery through policy and partnerships. So can I have a show of hands if we all agree with those recommendations? Lovely. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Donna. Yes, I should think you've had some water, but yes, yeah, we could talk for hours.
Yes, I'm sure.
But thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Marshall. If you would like, you both are free to go, or you can stay if you want to listen to us drone on. Although I don't think we're going to drone on very long. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And our next item is the work programme. And basically what we're looking at is the July meeting, when we have the Freeport coming back to answer the questions which weren't answered before. Yes, so we've already got that. And hopefully we'll be getting something else forward for the rest of the year. But thank you all very much for coming, and yep. Oh, haven't done too badly.
Not too badly at all.
Yeah, not too badly. Just 10 minutes over. Thank you.